do, just while I set my levels here, is if you would just say and spell your name.
So it's Vic Rosenthal, and it's Vicrosenthal.
Great. Okay. By way of starting, do you mind giving me just kind of a brief autobiographical sketch, where you're from, where you grew up,
Sure.
The trajectory that you've taken, what you're doing now?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the New York City area, Bronx, Yonkers. Went to college in state school in upstate New York, Binghamton. Became a Vista volunteer, and even in college started doing a little organizing work. Got a lot of credit for community internships because I didn't like being in class very much. Became a Vista volunteer and actually started learning a little bit more about what community organizing was.
What did you do for Vista?
I was placed with a county, Lorain County, Ohio, which is a very poor county that had been affected by, the downturn of the auto industry, the steel mill, and I organized the elderly all through Lorain County. Met some people in Cleveland and got exposed to the whole world of abuse in nursing homes. This was in the mid to late 1970s. And wound up getting involved in the nursing home reform movement for the next 10 years. And did that in Ohio for a couple of years. And then on a kind of a fluke, met this woman on a trip to the mountains in California. Turned out we hit it off, and I've been married to her now for almost 30 years, and we went back to New York. We both went to graduate school. I went to Rutgers, got a master's in public administration. Did more nursing home reform work before we moved out here to Minnesota about 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And what brought you here?
She's from here.
Okay.
She really wanted to come home. And then I got involved in more real community organizing work. Instead of it always dabbled in it, I became the head of the Minnesota Senior Federation, which organized the elderly around healthcare issues. We used some Midwest Academy organizing stuff. And then I got a fellowship through a foundation and got involved with this group called Jewish Community Action, and started doing congregational-based community organizing with the Jewish community around 1997, and haven't done anything else since.
And so, what are the major issues in that kind of work?
Well, the issues are often they're sort of come from the bottom up. What is it that the people in the community care about? But some of it has to do with, we've been very focused from the beginning on trying to have sort of a racial justice lens on all the work we do. So a lot of the work we've done has been in alliance with communities of color. So that has gotten us involved in some housing work. It's gotten us very involved in immigration reform, which we've done now for like 11 years. And now for years we've been doing sort of banking work, which led into anti-foreclosure work. And now the last 2 years we've gotten involved in healthcare reform. But a part of what we do is actually to change the way synagogues operate and to get them to be more focused on social and economic justice.
So, obviously there are a lot of different dimensions to that work. Can you say a little bit more about, specifically, how do you spend your days? How much time are you kind of out in the community, pounding the pavement, talking to different people? How much time are you in rabbis' chambers, pushing for this or that? How much, and then the kind of umbrella?
Well, that's a great question. It's a real mixture. It's both one of the great parts about my job and one of the difficult parts is I do a lot of different things. Every day is different. And the downside is every day is different, and I have to keep track of details. I'm the director, so I have to raise money. I have to staff the board of directors. I have to supervise staff.
Which is how many people for this
There's
organization?
7.2 or
Right.
7.3 of us. But it's a mixture. I mean, part of the job that I love is that I get to interact with a lot of different communities around a lot of different issues and engage in a lot of problem solving, strategic planning. A lot of organizing is, really sitting down, building relationships. I've built a lot of relationships in communities across the Twin Cities, both in my own, the Jewish community, but this coffee shop, for example. I know several of the people in this coffee shop. I know a lot of people in this community, and that's a really exciting part of the job. But I do spend time with rabbis, trying to persuade them that what we're doing is important to Jewish life, to their congregation, to their members. And a lot of it is to really, in the classic organizing approach, it's really a sense of how do we build enough power in the community of regular individuals in alliance with others so that we can make demands that we think we need to make in order to change the community and then change it. And so, it's about changing state policy, local policy. We work on federal legislation sometimes. For example, we're very, very involved right now in trying to help the Liberian community get an extension of their legal status. We have the largest Liberian community in the United States, and their legal status ends on March 31st.
Right, I just spoke to
Mayala. Yeah. So, for example, yesterday we were in conversation with the executive director of one of the Liberian groups to talk about what is our last 6 weeks, what are we going to do now to do whatever we can to get the status extended. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff, we did a lot of work this past week getting ready for a big meeting with Senator Franken to get him to play a lead role on immigration reform in the Judiciary Committee, which he's on. So that was a very big deal. We got 2 rabbis there, one of whom spoke. We were very involved in the healthcare debate. If you read in the paper, since you've been here, there's this big debate around general assistance medical care, and we were very involved in getting the bill through the House and the Senate, and now the governor vetoed it. Right. So now there's discussion about what does that mean, what can we do next. So
as an outsider looking around, the political culture, especially the left political culture in the Twin Cities, seems quite extraordinary. You don't see this kind of configuration of alliances as part of it, but also how dimensional it is. I mean, with arts communities, immigrant communities, religious communities, and labor. It's amazing to be in a place where people know what the IWW is.
Yeah. We actually do a lot of work with labor.
Can you just talk a little bit about the local political culture from your point of view, and maybe some of the changes you've seen over the years that you've been here?
Well, it's like a lot of things. It's a kind of a good news, bad news report. The good news is, I think more and more groups are realizing the need to be in alliance with one another because, let's face it, if you've done this work, I've done this work now for 30 years in one way or another. It's not been a great 30 years. If you care about human rights, economic equality, civil rights. It's been a tough 30 years. The economy has beat the crap out of people in our country. I think you can argue, especially in a place like Minnesota, the disparities between people of color and whites has grown. The disparity between poor and rich is worse. So, in a lot of ways, even the fight over healthcare this week was not a fight over what we can do that will expand access. It was a fight over can we prevent more people from being cut, and it's really hard to consistently be engaged in fights to just simply stay where you are. But the healthcare debate is a good example of large numbers of people, union folks, immigrant folks, and others, progressive folks, who came together and said, we got to do this together, we got to succeed, there's no alternative. And the ability from a point of view of a religious position is to be able to raise up issues of morality, issues of, from a religious point of view, why does it matter whether or not this stuff happens? And it matters a lot. The bad news is that I still think the left can be pretty unstrategic at times. They still feel the need to support things and to work on use tactics that don't work, and that are not necessarily successful. And I'm of the belief, I use the old saying, no permanent enemies, no permanent allies. And I believe that at times we sort of dismiss the other side and don't even want to talk to them. And I think that's a mistake, and I think it's cost us. I also think that as much as groups want to work together, there's still more at times of a focus on how do I build my organization versus how do I build a movement.
Right.
And I think you hear a lot of people talk about how I'm building a movement, and I think we're not there. Right. I think we're actually not that close
Does
yet.
the climate of scarcity make that worse? I mean, is there a kind of inward turning just over kind of basic
who gets
resources?
Money? Absolutely it is. But I just think that there's a natural tendency that all of us need to sort of fight, which is this idea that we're in a zero-sum game, and if your organization gets publicity, mine doesn't, rather than if the coalition gets publicity, we all get a little. And there's still too much of how do I promote my agenda, how do I promote my organization. And I like to think that my organization spends a lot of time simply being part of alliances, trying to build them and encourage them, and sometimes to our detriment, spending less time sort of putting Jewish community action out there as the key organization. And one of our challenges is that as a Jewish organization in a community that has a small Jewish community, there's only 40,000 Jewish people in the whole state. For some people, we're too Jewish, and for other people, we're not Jewish enough. And that kind of sometimes gets in the way of our ability to succeed.
Has the religious piece of it always been entwined in your own politics? Can you describe your own kind of political education and
never was. Well, I shouldn't say never. I mean, I grew up like a lot of Jewish kids in New York. I got bar mitzvahed, but my parents didn't care. I moved away from any connection to religion for many, many years. Ironically, I married a non-Jew, but then when we had our children, she thought it was valuable for them to have a religious education, and since she had no connection to her roots, and I've always at least had a secular cultural connection to Judaism, we said, well, why don't we enroll them in Hebrew school? I went to it. I hated it, but they can go and hate it too.
It was bad enough.
Which is pretty much what happened. They went, they hated it, they got their bar mitzvahs, and I actually, in some strange way, I think especially for my older son, it created some attention to sort of what I think he didn't know about a prayerful side in himself. He's probably the most he's the only one in the family who probably prays on his own. I don't think anyone else does that. But what I've come to realize now in the last 13, 14 years is a couple things. One, Judaism has given me a lot of, that's why you should do this. Our text is filled with references to justice. The history of the Jewish people is filled with references, whether it was the labor movement, the anti-war movement, the civil rights. Jewish people have liked to play roles in that. Not the institutional Jewish community, but Jewish people. Saul Alinsky, Rabbi Heschel, people that are pretty easy to look up to as sort of icons in their own world. And so it's been really good to be able to have this identity and say, okay, that makes sense. And then the other thing is if you're looking for ways to be effective in organizing, there's a lot of people who have an identity. And if you can work with their identity to give them a sort of a fix on why doing this work makes sense from their own identity and their own culture and their own religion, And if it moves them effectively, then go for it. So in a way, it's a tool.
Right. Well, it's a ready-made language for social justice.
I can walk into any synagogue and say, "Hey, did you read the Torah today? Did you see what Moses said about freedom?" Oh, okay. Every Seder is an opportunity to talk about liberation. And so we do a big Seder every year where we invite immigrants and civil rights folks all together to use the Seder as an opportunity to talk about current issues of oppression, current reasons for fighting for liberation, and what we can do as a broad community. And it's a phenomenal event. And we attract between 200 and 250 people every year for this Seder that we do. And people, every year it's a little bit bigger because more people want to come and find out, what is this thing about Passover and justice?
Yeah. So, what got you in the door of Vista then? I mean, what was your political consciousness as a young man, and absent the religious kind of language for it? I mean, what was moving you in those years?
Well, I was a student. As I said, I was a history major, so I liked reading about history. One of the classes that had a really big impact on me was actually a class learning about Hitler and the Nazis, and it's a very, very powerful class I took in my freshman year, and it had a big impact on me. Ironically, it sort of moved me further away from any notion of God, but closer to the idea that people need to stand up, they need to come together. And I found out that other people in the school were getting credit for just doing work in the community. And in 1975, Ralph Nader came to my school. Much as I not particularly had much respect for him as a presidential candidate, I had a lot of respect for him back then. And he gave this really impassioned plea to students and said, as students, you have an obligation to get involved in making our world a better place. And he wasn't speaking from a Jewish point of view, just a point of view of sort of calling us out. And it almost felt like he was looking at me the whole time he was speaking, even though there were like 300 kids in the room. So the next day I signed up for the New York Public Interest Research Group. You know about the PIRGs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There was a wonderful staff person who directed the office. He and I really hit it off. And he said, you might want to go to a couple of the professors in your history department. They might give you credit to work in this office. Really? Stay out of class, get credit, and do work in the community? Sure enough, that's what happened. And for my junior and senior year, I actually wound up getting 7 courses worth of credit to do organizing work in the community. And I wound up doing a lot of energy-related work. That was back in the 70s. I don't know if you remember the battle over the rights of utility companies to shut off people's electricity. So we worked on one of the first shut-off ordinances in the state that said in the cold months
that you can't do that.
You can't do that. I think it was called Lifeline. So I got really involved. We would go to Albany. I went to churches throughout Binghamton and spoke to. There were no synagogues, or maybe there was one. I don't remember ever going to a synagogue, but I remember going to a lot of churches and speaking about why we needed to do this. We organized students. We had 3 buses go to Albany. That was exciting. That was
kind of the issue that really made the PIRGs, wasn't it?
I think it was a huge issue. And this was 76 and 77. And so I was getting ready to, I was in my senior year, I was doing this work, I was feeling really energized by it, and I thought, what do I do now? So I thought about the Peace Corps. I had 3 options. Peace Corps was one, Vista was another, and I could get an organizing job working for the PIRG in New York City. I kind of ruled out Peace Corps right away because the thought of traveling to another country didn't really seem to fit.
And by then, Peace Corps kind of had a little bit of a CIA.
It would seem like missionary work a little bit. Carrying the American flag, aren't we great? That wasn't me. So I ruled that out, and then it became between Vista and and Kurg, and in a lot of ways it was a financial decision. I mean, it sort of sounds ironic at this point. I think Kurg was paying $5,800 a year, and Vista was paying $6,500 a year. And I thought, well, for an extra $700, you know, I am going to be on my own for the first time. I'm going to be out of college. And this way I'll get to go to a new place. I've never been...
And that's like an assignment, so they sent you to Lorraine.
Exactly. You can be locally or nationally recruited, but I was going through the national process. So first they're going to send me to work with Native Americans in Oklahoma, and that just felt like, I don't even know what that means. And then they said, but the second option is to organize senior citizens in Ohio, and I thought, well, I've been doing work with senior citizens in Binghamton. Why don't I continue down that path? Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. And, you know, in one way or another, my mindset has been about organizing ever since then.
Right. Did you grow up in a household where political commitments were important or salient or often discussed? Well,
dinner time was a political conversation, almost inevitably. And I have an older sister who's 60. So she went to college in 1966 or 7 during the war, got involved in the anti-war movement in Connecticut and then Boston, would routinely come home and talk about going to marches in D.C. Her and my father would have big fights about that. He was against the war, but against her protesting, because he was just being a father with his daughter. So they would fight about this stuff, and then one of the sort of very, very powerful memories in my mind was in 1968, the argument between my father and sister about the election of 68. My father was a Humphrey supporter, my sister was a McCarthy supporter, and they went back and forth. And I was 13 years old. I just drank it all in. It was great. I didn't participate because, frankly, it didn't really resonate a lot, but it was really fun to watch all these issues get debated. And then my mom would periodically talk about, door knocking. She door knocked for Adlai Stevenson in the 50s. She door knocked for McGovern. And I thought, it's kind of interesting. So that was always there, even though they really weren't, like my father didn't go to meetings of the Democratic Party, but they voted, they talked about a lot of it. My father mother were very outspoken in the family about civil rights, human rights. My father was an owner of a business. His staff was unionized through the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, and yet he wasn't anti-union. He seemed to have a good relationship with the union. It was sort of like, this is what workers do. They unionize, they make demands on me, the boss, and I accede to the demands. Mm-hmm. So all of that sort of, I think, really shaped this political identity, this idea that caring about the world and politics and the underdog is a big deal. Yeah. You don't sit on the sideline. And I guess the other thing is my dad could have easily pushed me into his business, really encouraged me to go to work for his company, and he never did. I mean, it was always for me and my sister, find your own path, do what you want to do. In fact, he always discouraged us, don't do what I did, it's a rotten job. So my sister went off, and her path was to become a social worker, and mine was to go into this kind of work.
Uh-huh. So now, jumping forward a couple of decades, I've been talking to people all over the country, all different sorts of people, and when I talk about our current moment, there's a broad consensus that is a phrase with powerful meaning, that this is an extraordinary moment in many ways. But there's no consensus at all about how to think about it, or what's important about it, what's extraordinary about it. When I say the phrase to you, how does it resonate? What seems important about our current moment? And then if you could back up a little bit and talk about, for both your organization and for you personally, kind of what's your experience of the last couple of years been?
It's interesting. I thought it was an extraordinary moment. It's less clear to me now. The last number of years have been pretty tough in terms of the work. The 8 years under Bush were very, very bad years. Dealing with we basically during those eight years we played a lot of defense. You know, we tried to make the lives for immigrants not quite as bad. You know, we made some progress on some local housing stuff, which was good, but the budget. I mean, we had 8 years of Bush and then 8 years of Pawlenty. You know, he's the governor of Minnesota, and it's been bad. I mean, you know, I'm not sure who was worse, to be quite honest. Pawlenty's going out with a bang, you know. When the election cycle first started, I wasn't an immediate, you know, wow, Obama's going to be phenomenal. I actually, you know, was an Edwards supporter initially, and I have one of my sons was already off in college, but my younger one came of his own political age at like 12. He started reading about politics. He wanted to engage in all the conversations, and then he read Obama's second book. And after he read it, this is 2 years ago, so he was 19. He'd just gone away to first year of college. He came home and said, "You guys got to support Obama. He's unbelievable, blah, blah, blah." And by then it was coming out that Edwards was cheating on his wife, so it wasn't hard to jump from Edwards. So we got on the Obama bandwagon, and it was exciting. You know, we came to Minnesota. We waited online for 2 hours to hear him speak. You would have had to be pretty much have a heart of stone not to be moved by it, and we were moved by it. We got caught up in it, and I really thought that this was sort of one of those moments in history. You know, maybe this was going to be a moment that I would remember, like some of the bad moments in my life, like Kennedy being killed, King being killed. You know, we've had our share of where were you on that day. You know. But it's not stayed with us very long. It's not stayed with me very long. I've been particularly discouraged by the lack of that the vision hasn't continued to be put out there for where we want to go. I've not been pleased with the goal of bipartisanship when the other side seems pretty clear that their goal is simply to make sure nothing happens. So I've been dismayed by the Democrats' lack of courage, their lack of vision. Both, you know, in Minnesota we have huge majorities, Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate. In the Senate it's veto-proof, and in the House it's 3 votes short, and they still can't get anything done. It's been really discouraging, and so as much as it felt like a moment, I'm not so sure now, and I've really been struck by like the Tea Party activism. You hear less about it. I was actually saying to my wife last night that I really think a lot of what I've read is that there are some people, at least, who believe that the Tea Party growth has been a growth through of racism. And I'm really struck by how little is said about what I believe is an attack on Obama for no other reason than that he's black. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of white people in this country simply will not allow a black man to be elected. It's just simply unacceptable.
Right. Like the people who wouldn't let their kids go to school to hear him speak in Texas.
Right, exactly.
Extraordinary.
It's amazing. I mean, that idea that there were actual columnists saying, and we have one in our own local paper, the Star Tribune, saying that where does the president come off speaking to our kids? So like, are you kidding me? I mean, Bush did it.
Every president has done it.
But it was clear to me that the reason is that there are millions and millions of white people, some very outspoken like the Tea Partyists, others not so, who simply do not believe black people have a right to be leaders. Period. And I think that a lot more of the reaction to his administration and to lack of cooperation has been, we're just not going to let him be president. I mean, I used to worry that he would be assassinated. Now I don't worry about that anymore. Now I just simply worry that they're going to crush him.
They won't let him do anything.
Right.
So I guess, I mean, let me ask you to parse this out a little bit more, because there are so many layers to it. There are kind of the structural layers. I mean, one of the people I talked to yesterday, it was kind of an amazing line. He said, he said, I realized that the really important policy decisions are not made at the pay grade of the White House. They're made somewhere else. And so, actually, the presidency is not a very powerful office when it comes to really important things under late capitalism. And, so there's that kind of structural layer of power relations and inertia and everything else that kind of is tilted towards the status quo. Then there's the layer that you're talking about, the kind of the racial politics and other things, not just race, but a number of kind of specific concerns of the moment that are weighing in. And then there's the personalities involved and their choices. I mean, Obama's choice to keep holding out the olive branch, and the Senate and the Congress and the kind of tactical choices they've made. How do you think, in terms of really looking at what's important about the way this first year of the administration has unrolled? Where do you put the emphasis?
Well, one thing that I think I missed, one of the brilliant things about Obama was the ability to organize grassroots, or at least mobilize grassroots, millions of people on Twitter, millions of small contributions. And I think not nearly enough was done to keep that going, to really use that momentum and use those people to govern. And I think MoveOn.org was not the answer. It felt like it was turned over to them, and I don't really like them that much. I mean, and I'm not a big, even though it worked for an election, it's a lot harder to do it for governing. You can mobilize people to show up on election day, but governing requires, hey, how you doing?
You got it forward a little bit there.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'll talk to you after the meeting.
Okay, all right. It was sort of like, you've got to really want to move these people if they're going to get involved in governing. And I don't think that was done, and I'm not sure where the money would have come to do that, but I think it could have been done, or at least should have tried to be done. I think part of it is that Obama was dealt a really bad hand. I mean, there wasn't much good that he could do. I mean, he was faced with the worst job loss in 50, 60 years. He was faced with the worst deficit in the history of the United States. He was faced with 2 wars that were unwinnable. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's sort of like being told you have to bet your entire pot, all your money, and you're dealt no pair and all your cards are out of order. I mean, I think maybe he overreached by trying to do maybe too many things at once, that if he had maybe just worked on stimulus and jobs, put healthcare on the side, much as I'm a big supporter of healthcare reform, maybe if he had just worked on a couple of key things. And then I think they did, like Democrats have been doing since I was a kid, they did a horrible job explaining what they were doing. It's amazing to me that in the history of our country, all of the most important social and economic legislation that has ever been passed is passed by Democratic Congresses, mainly Democratic presidents, not always. I mean, some of the best environmental legislation was passed by Democratic Congress with a Republican president. Do we know that? Does the average American know who got us Medicare and Medicaid? And what the difference it's really made in our society? The fact that I was just reading this last night, an article about how badly we do on all the healthcare indicators around the world, infant mortality.
Until you reach age 65.
Exactly. Why is that story not told? So I just think one of the real failures of the administration was to do too many things and then not to at all do a good job. So I think what we've done is we've lost the war of the argument. We've lost the war of branding.
One of the questions I have, I mean, it's almost shocking to ask it, but is that a winnable war? With a lockstep, bullet point, talking point, daily briefed Republican Party, and with Fox News and all of the other...
It may not be. And one of my takeaways from all of this And I think it's another thing the Obama administration could figure out a way to do, and I think they've tried to do a little of it. I think the stimulus package has done it a little bit, which is to give us the tools to win the fight at the local level. And what's gotten me through this fight and this mess of a year has been, I am not going to worry as much about whether health care reform passes in Washington. I'm going to worry about what we can do about general assistance medical care in St. Paul, in Minnesota, and I'm going to worry about what I can do about health care reform and other issues at the city council level, at the county level, because if we can move people at the local level and get them to see that they can win on some of these fights and that getting involved makes a difference. You know, it's the old story. I by the way, teach a political science class at a local college. So part of how I think is I sort of think from a teacher sometimes. And so I think about sort of the argument about federalism. And then one of the arguments I use with my students is that, you know, federalism is all about using states and local communities as laboratories to test. So I think about that a lot. The organizing models we use, the legislative models we use, anything we do, are we doing something that's somewhat unique that can be tested, that shows what can be done in other local communities? My organization, for example, there's no other organization in the United States that approaches organizing in the Jewish community exactly the way we do. Part of the reason that I like doing that is I like to be able to say that if we can make this work in Minnesota, you can do it in Phoenix, you could do it in Denver, you could do it in Atlanta. You know, think about the number of cities that are like the Twin Cities when it comes to sort of some sort of configuration, at least in the Jewish community. So I think a big takeaway is it may not be to win the war of words, but it's still to do a better job. I would still say we do it poorly. Mm-hmm. We may not be able to win because Sarah Palin can just nod and wink and she wins. You know.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with the stimulus. I mean, now the conversation has changed a little bit in the last couple of days, as early indicators are actually a little bit positive.
That it made a difference.
That it actually worked, and Republicans, I won't say they're on the defensive, but they've at least been called out on the way that they have taken credit for its successes at the same time that they have continued to...
Well, our own governor, you know, he's balancing his budget with $380 million coming from the feds while he's campaigning for president, saying that Obama's the reason why our deficit is so big. Both ways, you know. I think one of the issues that, and again, you know, the media to me is absolutely a big part of the problem, is this hypocrisy just continues. And I think part of the media's job is to call it out every chance they get. When a Republican gets up and bashes some part of the Obama plan, but takes the money in the local community, they got to say, so excuse me, explain to me why you bash a plan and then take the money. That doesn't work for me. Or last night on one of the local news shows, we had Republicans voted, 38 out of 47 Republicans in the House voted for this health care bill. And now they've all said that they're going to help sustain the governor's veto. Now, one of the Republicans was on the television last night, and he was asked the question, so why did you vote for the bill when you're now not going to vote to override the governor's veto? I mean, what changes? But he didn't ask it that way, and the guy was able to say, well, the governor thinks the bill could be improved. Okay. All right, let's go a little further with that. What does that have? Why did you vote for the bill? If the governor thinks you don't talk to the governor before you vote? If you thought the bill needed to be improved, then you should have voted against the bill. Why did you vote for the bill? That hard questioning that I think, I don't know if the media ever really did it, but I sort of think like maybe they did it one time. Although I know Dan Rather got fired because he actually tried to ask hard questions, and he's not even a good journalist.
He's not even a good journalist.
I don't know. Maybe you can ask those. Maybe you can hold people. I mean, part of my takeaway over the last number of years is that the culture of accountability is kind of disappeared. We just don't really believe in it.
Well, because nobody follows up on anything. So
you say you're going to do one thing, you don't do it. Who the hell cares?
Right.
You cheat on your wife. Who really cares? I mean,
unless you're Tiger Woods.
Unless you're Tiger Woods, yeah. Well, he's black. Come on. Although, let's see. Edwards cheated on his wife. He couldn't be president. So Clinton cheated on his wife. He got impeached. So you do pay for it. You don't pay the ultimate price unless you're Tiger Woods.
Strange times.
It is really strange times, and it's a weird thing. I'm now in my mid-50s. I've been doing this a long time. Still have a lot of energy, which half the time I can't really figure out why I do. So I don't feel beaten down by this.
Do you feel optimistic?
In a strange sort of way, I still do. I think a big part of why I feel optimistic is because I feel like the alternative simply doesn't work. It's sort of like, you could be dead or you could be living. The alternative to life is death. I'm not ready to be dead yet, so I'm going to live. And if I'm going to live, I'm going to live with energy. And it's kind of interesting. I have my very cynical moments, and I don't know whether this conversation comes across as sounding like a person that has hope or not. But I have two sons that are in their 20s. I hope they're around for a long time. I hope they have their own children. And if I give up, and if I look at the world that the glass is half full, then what am I talking about their life? That doesn't seem acceptable. My son, my younger son, who is very politically active, is very optimistic. And I want to fuel that and feed that as much as I possibly can because, my way of looking at this is my generation, and it might be your generation too. We fucked the world up big time. And at the very least I could do in the last 10 to 20 years of work that I do is to do whatever I can to undo some of the mess we made and to try to create some paths for better stuff. And I do a lot of organizing work with people that are half my age, and that encourages me. I'm part of this, on the board of a group called Take Action Minnesota, and they're doing really good progressive work, and most of the staff in that organization are in their 20s and 30s, and so that gives me hope.
Yeah. Do you sense, we talked about at the national level the kind of wave of energy and passion that swept Obama into office kind of dissipated in a hurry. Is that still out there to be tapped?
Yes.
Does it exist in some kind of dormant form?
I absolutely believe it does. I mean, I think, right now the media is focused on the Tea Party activists. The reality is I think that's a really tiny minority of people in this country. Just like all the anti-immigrant vitriol that's out there, it gets a lot of play, but in the end, there's not that much there. And the media just does a tremendous job of making sure to interview those people because they're out there, and they play well. They put up signs that are racist, and they make stupid speeches, and they sound like idiots. And that's much more interesting to report on the news than some good little organizing that's going on in the community that's just not as fascinating because it's not as stupid. I mean, Sarah Palin look, Saturday Night Live had good ratings for 2 years because of Sarah Palin. Would you not lead with that? I mean, Rush Limbaugh is who he is because he's entertaining. I'm sure you listen to him sometime just like I do because you want to hear what he has to say.
Only when I step into a New York cab.
Okay,
and there he is, which always surprises me every time, but there he is.
But I wonder if they put it on because it entertains their customers. I mean, I don't know. I just think, O'Brien, Beck, these guys, they're nuts. They're crazy. And, if really left, if they could do what they could do, this country would be ashes in 20 years. I mean, I've said to people, I sometimes wonder why really smart people in the university, so you're one of those people, doesn't run models on what the country would look like if the conservatives actually did what they wanted to do. Play it out.
Right.
Play it out. We deport 12 million undocumented immigrants. Great. We lower taxes on all rich people. You know, we kind of know where this will take us. So run the numbers. How big will the deficit be if Republicans get to do what they want? I mean, what will actually happen to our healthcare system if we allow HSAs to be what they want them to be, and we allow insurance companies to continue to run? What happens if you go through all the deregulation? I mean, part of the reason our economy is where it is because basically for about 20 years, banks and mortgage companies simply were told, do whatever the hell you want, we don't care. And they did.
So we've gotten a glimpse.
Yeah, we know what it looks like. So just play out the whole damn thing. I'm surprised. And not that the media would pick it up, but I would like to read it. And I don't have the talent to do that. So I would love to see the really brilliant historians and economists and sociologists get together, write out the model for what does the United States look like in 2030 if the conservatives take over the country and run it the way they want to for the next 20 years. And I think at that point, we won't just be a second-rate power to China. I don't even know where we'll be at that point.
It's an interesting idea.
I have a good friend who's he's a Lutheran minister. We've known each other now. I met him doing organizing work when I was a Vista volunteer in Northern Ohio, and we've been friends now for over 30 years. And he's a brilliant guy. He does healthcare policy work in Wisconsin. And these are the kind of, we talk about this whenever we're together, and we rail and scream and holler about what's wrong with the world and how we would fix it. And then we talk about all playing these scenarios out. And he's actually talked about writing a book on this. And he actually could do it. The problem is nobody's going to pay him to write it, and he actually has to make money in order to pay his mortgage. But I just think there's like really interesting stuff there. And I think the average American, if we could figure out a way to teach them and organize them to understand what it means to listen to the Mitch McConnells and the Sarah Palins of the world, they would be so scared that they would go to the polls and they'd start writing letters to their legislators. I mean, one of the things that's happened with this general assistance medical care debate is how many people we've touched with that because they are just so morally outraged that a governor would eliminate a health care program for the very poorest people and say we can't afford it. I think a lot of them are saying we can't afford not to do it. That a society, you know, the old Humphrey line about you judge a society by the way it cares for the poorest and the most vulnerable. I think there are a lot more people that are trying to judge America by those standards right now, and we're doing really poorly.
I don't know if we want to end on that note.
Well, that's a really pessimistic note. Well, you know, I'll end on the note of hope. I mean, I get to meet with people every week, and people are excited in some ways about the work we're doing. My organization is the most visible and has the best reputation it's had in Minnesota in its history. And I think there are more and more people that are touched by the notion that getting together and building alliances makes a difference, and we got to do more of it. And so, you know, I'll go to work on Monday, and it's still hope in my mind and a bounce in my step. Still in the belief that despite what all the pundits say and as bad as like immigration reform looks like right now, we're going to get some things done. Liberians are going to get their status renewed, and somehow, I don't know how right now, we will move some of this stuff. Oh, I know what I'll finish on. Here's a good
Okay.
one. So here's a good victory that we achieved in our community, and that's what that guy was mentioning to me. So they're building, I don't know if you've talked to anyone about the Central Corridor, which is University Avenue. Maybe you've
I've driven
on it. So they're going to put a light rail train down the center of it. And this community's had real problems with it, and my organization's been really involved in organizing, specifically around where the stations get placed. And we've been making arguments about environmental justice, and we've really argued the point that the way they made the line, it was really pretty much against this community because the stations were all placed between a quarter mile and a half a mile apart, except in the Hmong and African American community where the stations were a mile apart. And so it was so obvious what was being done. So we've spent the last 3 years arguing with local, state, and national officials that you have to change the line, and that the formula used by the Federal Transportation Authority is the wrong formula because it's still too focused on getting the train through the community fast rather than really being an accessible system for everyone. Obama got elected. He appointed a new FTA commissioner and a new Secretary of Transportation, and they have been listening. And they made a ruling about 2 months ago. They changed the federal formula, and they are now providing the funds to add these 3 additional stations right in the heart of the community of color. And this happened because of Obama. And the community, and when Ray LaHood, who's the Secretary of Transportation, actually came just a mile from here to speak in our community about why they made this change, he said it's because people in this community were so well organized and didn't let go of this issue and kept telling us what they wanted, and now we've delivered. Now, that's a combination of doing really good organizing on the local issue and having federal officials that are listening. And that happened because we have a different president. Now, most people in the United States don't know that story, and I guarantee that story is being repeated in a lot of communities around the country. And that's the kind of story that makes you think electing a new president can really make a difference. Finishing that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your perspective.
Absolutely, it's fun. So now what? What's